right, and I'm going to pull up the presentation just 1 minute. All right, well, thank you all. My name is Graham Owen. I am with the Department of Planning and Development, work on the long-range planning team, and I most likely sent out the invite that you saw regarding this open house meeting. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate your time. We are going to be taking about 1 hour to discuss the SSPA retrospective and specifically some preliminary recommendations that we have on this long-range planning exercise. So the presentation that I have is going to take about 20 minutes or so, and so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. Any feedback that you want to provide now or after the open house, feel free. We are absolutely in kind of outreach mode right now, and we're looking to gather as much feedback as we can in advance of the next steps with the Planning Commission and the board, looking at some changes to this big process. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background, SSPA, we've been evaluating some changes to our site-specific plan amendment process through what we call the retrospective evaluation. So this kicked off in October of last year, and we'll be looking at a number of changes to the structure of our program. Before we get into kind of the details of SSPA, I think we wanted to just start with the main object of our process, which is the comprehensive plan. So most of y'all are probably familiar with the comp plan for short, but for those that are not, the comp plan is a decision-making guide that helps decision makers in Fairfax County determine our long-range land use vision and make decisions about the built and natural environment. The plan is a legally required document in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Every county and locality has to have one. And the plan provides recommendations and policy. It's not law like the zoning ordinance, for example, which is used to implement the comprehensive plan. So the recommendations in the comp plan are used by the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals, county staff, and the community as the common basis for decision-making about land use applications in particular. It is a living document. Changes to it are called plan amendments, and so that's kind of what the main focus of our process is looking at changes to the comp plan. So the comprehensive plan can be amended through amendments, and one of the ways, we have a lot of ways that you can initiate comp plan amendments, but for today we're focusing on just one, which is dealing with sites, and this is called the site-specific plan amendment process. This is an open process. It allows anyone to propose a change to the area plan volumes of the comprehensive plan. The proposals are what we call nominations, and so we have an open frequent a 2-year cycle. Every 2 years we go to the North County districts, which are shown in blue on this map, and then we alternate to the South County districts, which are the districts shown in red, in what we call the nomination period. So this is when we're soliciting for proposals to come in and change specific plan recommendations in the comp plan. So each north-south round of SSPA consists of 3 phases, as shown in this figure on this slide right here. So it consists of a nomination period. This is when anyone can submit a nomination. The second is the screening period. So this is when the supervisors appoint district-based task forces and staff to review the nominations within their specific district and provide recommendations on which ones should advance as formal plan amendments. This screening phase following the task force hearing or task force meetings is followed by a public hearing and a recommendation on each nomination with the Planning Commission, and concludes with the Board of Supervisors taking action to advance some of the nominations that result from screening for further review and formal review as a comprehensive plan amendment. The third phase, once something has been added to what we call the comprehensive plan work program, which is just our schedule of plan amendments that we're working on, is what we call the implementation period. And this is when the staff and task forces review the specific impacts and provide recommendations on the plan amendments that resulted from those earlier phases. So this is another round of engagement that is conducted with the community, and it's following the task force review. There's a public hearing with both the Planning Commission and ultimately the Board of Supervisors before they decide on the proposed amendment. So we are nearing the end of the first cycle of SSPA. And so what we're now doing is evaluating what has worked and what could be improved through what we're terming the SSPA retrospective, or retrospective evaluation, if you will. And so this evaluation has identified 3 primary goals to improve the process. One is to reduce the overall timeline of the review. The second is to increase or expand community engagement at each stage. And the third is to ensure a better balance between site-specific plan amendments and other types of long-range planning studies, such as area-wide and county-wide policy amendments. So these goals really kind of speak to the need also for additional information, especially that balance question about the types of information that we need with nominations to ensure that staff, the community, and those that are especially directly affected or potentially affected by nominations can really clearly understand the proposed land use changes. So we have done a lot of community outreach on the goals, and this was conducted in October and November, started off in October and November, and included a community survey, discussions with county agencies, discussions with all of our chairs and vice chairs of our task forces that we've had to date. We've met with virtually all of our board and plan commissioners individually, and we've also had discussions with the development community. The results of this outreach, which we'll go over in just a couple of slides, were presented to the Planning Commission's Land Use Process Review Committee in January, and then also to the board's Land Use Policy Committee in February of this year, along with a series of kind of early draft recommendations for potential plan changes. We also reached out to several jurisdictions in Virginia and Maryland to see how they handle plan amendments for specific sites, trying to kind of get a sense of what are our peer jurisdictions doing that's similar or not similar in terms of their long-range planning for specific sites. And as I mentioned, we did conduct a survey in November and early December using an online tool called Public Input. We received about 458 total responses, of which 46 were task force members, which is about half of the task force members that we've had in North County and South County. 47 were nominators or development industry representatives, and about 150 were members of the public who had indicated that they had participated in SSPA to date. We advertised and successfully received responses from across the county. A couple of hotspots for participation are shown here in this heat map on the screen. Right, so the next couple of slides show some of the highlights from the results of our survey. The full results can be found on our website. I'd be happy to drop a link in the chat to the survey for those of you that are interested in seeing what those surveys results were. This first survey question in this first slide really kind of asks how do people stay engaged and hear about long-range planning efforts in the county? We found that the district supervisors' newsletters, direct contact by staff in the district offices, and our comp plan listserv, which you haven't signed up. If you haven't signed up for it, we would highly encourage you to do so. It's a great method for staying in touch with all of our long-range planning efforts. These were kind of the most preferred or kind of the most effective ways for people to hear about the long-range planning efforts. We also asked about people's preferences for community engagement, specifically looking at a couple of different types. So targeted community meetings, open houses, task force meetings, and then also things like providing hearing testimony at Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors hearings, as well as more passive methods such as the listserv that I mentioned, writing letters to decision makers, etc. The top engagement methods that you can see on this slide in kind of the grayish beige color for nominators as well as community participants, we're having targeted community meetings held for residents that live near the sites. And then this was followed by receiving email updates. The task force option was strongly supported by task force members, but the community at large was more interested in just having those more targeted community meetings or open houses, for example. Finally, we asked about whether new submission requirements such as a site plan concept, earlier nominator engagement, a letter of intent to file a rezoning, having the property owner signature, submission fees, would these help result in clearer nominations? There was general agreement about the site plan concept, and especially also earlier engagement was strongly supported by the community. There was mixed support for the letter of intent to file a rezoning, as well as the owner's consent and the fee. So as I mentioned, the results of these surveys, and this is 3 slides among many, so I can happy to drop a copy of the survey results in the chat if you'd like. The results of this were presented to the PC and the board earlier this year, and they formed a working group of 2 members of the board and 2 members of the Planning Commission who met with staff over this spring to consider a range of options for process revisions based on the feedback that we'd received. That group provided recommendations on potential changes to the process, which we'll be going over in the next couple of slides. And this will summarize the kind of the main elements of the revised process. So kind of writ large, the new process or the revised process would retain the same basic structure and integrity of the current process with the nominations and screening phases, leading to the adoption of a new comprehensive plan amendment work program following the conclusion of the screening phase, with the review of the plan amendments taking place during the evaluation phase. And that's all that, what currently happens with the, existing process. However, there are modifications within each phase, which we'll go over in a minute. One right off the bat, the nomination window would occur countywide every 2 years instead of every 4 years. So this would be a shorter overall frequency, or a more frequent cycle for specific land areas. The nomination period would consist of a shorter 1-month nomination window, and then the screening phase would also be shorter, so 4 months of screening. This timeline for the review of the plan amendments, once they're added to the work program in that evaluation phase, would vary, and we'll explain why in a subsequent slide. So looking at the nomination phase, the 1-month nomination window, again, would open every 2 years countywide. Submissions would need to meet new submission criteria, and there's also broader eligibility criteria in order to be accepted for review, which we'll review in another slide on this. But then once accepted, as is the case today, they would proceed to screening. All right, so the screening phase. The community engagement during screening remains a priority, and we will do community engagement during this phase. One of the things that we are looking at, however, based on the feedback that we've received, is reconsidering the task force involvement during this phase. So we're not proposing to do a screening phase task force any longer. So instead of assuming the use of a task force, we would hold targeted community meetings to ensure that those that are living and working near the subject sites are engaged early in the process. So this was the preferred method of engagement for most of the stakeholders when asked in the survey, including the community kind of writ large, as it was more thought to provide an appropriate forum for identifying and addressing localized issues than the use of a task force. One other change that is being made here is that currently we have a planning commission hearing during the screening phase, and we will be looking at a open, publicly accessible, publicly open workshop, which would take place in lieu of the hearing. This would be open to the public, as I mentioned, but it would provide a more deliberative forum for screening, with staff, appointed officials, members of the public, nominators, all being there to be able to kind of really deliberatively discuss the nominations and determine which ones are the high priority nominations that should advance for further review. The Planning Commission would make a recommendation, as they do today, to the Board of Supervisors on which should be added to the work program for further review, and then the board, as they currently do, would take action on the work program following that workshop. So once things are on the work program, and once the board has adopted the new work program containing some of the nominations, which are now going to be plan amendments, this is when the evaluation phase would begin. So one big change here is that the timeline for each individual amendment would depend on the complexity of the proposed amendment, the community engagement needs, the availability of resources, et cetera. So there isn't going to be a uniform amendment schedule, so to speak, during this phase, which is a change. This is in part because instead of assuming the use of a task force for every single plan amendment that gets to this phase, community engagement for each nomination, or an amendment, excuse me, would be designed based on the circumstances of the amendment. This would allow for options for the board members that are looking at these specific amendments to be able to select the best type of engagement given the circumstances of the amendment. So, for example, if you have a small singular amendment of limited scope, limited impact, that could proceed through either established means. For example, if you have a land use committee that's located within the district, then maybe they're well equipped to be able to handle the plan amendment. In some cases, you could do targeted community meetings, just really making sure that we're focusing on the localized issues that are pertinent to the site, and then also ensuring that we are hearing from stakeholders that are nearest to the site. If you have areas that are receiving multiple plan amendments in close proximity to one another, where you might have cumulative considerations, for example, across the nominations. Also, if you have more complex studies or just larger studies, given the scale of the change, the geographic size of the nomination site, other factors, that's when we would be looking at having a specially appointed task force to review the amendments at that stage. So this engagement would be identified with the work program, coordinated with the district member, but it's something that we would also continue to do, is engagement, as I mentioned, have engagement at the screening phase, have engagement at the evaluation phase, but just making sure that it's predicated on the circumstances and the needs of each amendment, rather than assuming kind of a uniform approach for every single one. So a couple of other changes that we're going to go over here. relate to kind of the nitty-gritty details of the nominations proper. We've reorganized some of the existing justification criteria and the intent behind each one. And they're all kind of trying to get at, what compels the need for a change. So we use these criteria to screen the nominations during that second phase. This set of justification criteria is largely reorganizational, but we are really trying to kind of emphasize that these justification criteria should be used to make sure that we are focusing staff, the community's time on the high priority nominations. So a couple of things that we'll be looking to and asking nominators to justify is how would the proposal address an emerging community concern or change in circumstances? How are they advancing the objectives in the comprehensive plan today? Are they not be contrary to longstanding policies? Beyond the comprehensive plan, how are they aligning themselves with the goals that we have in the county's other board authorized planning documents and studies? So the strategic plan, One Fairfax social and racial equity policy, the community-wide housing strategic plan, and others. And then also, if a nomination has been resubmitted from a previous cycle, it can still be submitted, but we would ask that the nominator explain in detail why a change in circumstances really kind of warrants an additional review. So what's kind of compelling the resubmittal? Eligibility criteria. So these are the this should say proposed eligibility, but these are the objective criteria that we use to determine whether something is eligible for the process or is not. So a couple of changes here. What we're doing is we're actually broadening the range of eligible geography by allowing the nomination of land areas that have been subject to a land use plan amendment after 2 years from the date of adoption compared to the current 4-year requirement. We're also clarifying that land areas are eligible if they've been currently or were previously subject to a board action in an amendment with no change in the site's land use recommendations, such as a land use mix or density or intensity. One key example here is Reston, for example, where there's an ongoing study in Reston that's looking at the Reston, all of the Reston planning document, but there's relatively few instances where the land use recommendations for specific sites is actually changing. So this would enable most of Reston to be eligible for SSPA for the upcoming cycle. Lastly, we would retain restrictions on submissions for changes to countywide policies or systems. So that's no change there. As it is today, SSPA does not allow for changes to be proposed for the transportation network, trails, and bike plans, parks, public facilities, those sorts of things. SSPA is limited in scope to just site-specific land use changes. And finally, we will also retain a restriction on multiple submissions by a nominator for the same property. So one proposal per nominator per site. We are asking for additional submission items to be submitted as part of the nomination to enhance the community and staff's understanding of the nominations. So these additional submission requirements would be used to determine whether a nomination should be added to the work program and advance for further review. So a couple of the additional things that we're looking at are that conceptual site plan. So this will help staff in the community, really understand visually what's depicted in the statement of justification. We found that most nominations these days do submit these, and so this is just making sure that we are clear from the start that this is a community expectation. We are going to be asking for information regarding the nominator's potential development timeline, as well as key factors that they see for engaging the community should something advance for further study at the evaluation phase. We are asking for the consent of the property owners for the nominated property, so that is a change, but we have heard near universal support for that with the Planning Commission and the board. Additionally, we are going to be looking for a submission fee. However, there is going to be a waiver provision, making sure that those that are less resourced, as well as community groups, still have an ability to submit without having to pay for a submission fee. For others, the submission fee is going to be relatively small. We're thinking about $200 to $500 to help cover the cost of mailing and outreach that's associated with the screening phase. And then additionally, we will just require acknowledgement that we may request additional analysis and data from the nominators should something be added to the work program for further study. So a couple of things. Looking at the recommendations kind of writ large, we received a lot of substantial and really truly substantive input from planning stakeholders throughout this retrospective. We think that the changes that are outlined here will provide an avenue for the county to better address long-range planning by better ensuring that there's greater flexibility and a more efficient use of the SSPA process. The changes, as I think we've gone over, they modify rather than replace the current process and really retain some of the beneficial elements that have been added to SSPA and its predecessors over time to help organize and prioritize long-range planning. The changes would not only retain the ability of the public to participate at each stage, but really kind of adapt and gear community engagement towards the unique circumstances and needs presented by the potential amendments and the people who live and work near the sites. And then finally, the changes to the cycle frequency, having broader eligibility, but then also enhancements to the submission requirements and justification criteria, paired with the changes to the engagement, can really ensure that the high priority nominations that are most in alignment with county goals and objectives, those that are of strategic importance to the county, have near-term development timelines, that those are the ones that we really kind of prioritize for further review. And then we think with all of this, we'll also be able to have broader discussions paired with these changes, broader discussions with the Planning Commission and the board about prioritization of long-range planning efforts, so that we're orienting ourselves towards broader levels of planning focus. So countywide policy, area studies, and making sure that we are prioritizing those in addition to those high priority SSPAs. All right, and so this is the next steps on the retrospective. As I mentioned, kicked off in October. We had that early round of outreach during the winter. We've had that working group that's developed the recommendations that we've gone over, and so we will be going to the Planning Commission's Land Use Process Review Committee for the next discussions next week on May the 19th. So if you'd like to take a look at that, feel free. And then following that, we will go to the board's Land Use Policy Committee on June the 14th. So should this schedule hold, we anticipate that the board may take action on the new process, or the revised process rather, on June the 28th. And if all that holds, we would most likely start up the new countywide nomination period in September. So with that, that is the final slide I have here. Oh, I'm realizing I might have advanced beyond there. Okay. I'll pause it right there, but happy to take any questions that you have.
How about comments?
No comments, just questions. No, go ahead, comments, feel free.
Yeah, this is Mark Danner, and Graham, I previously contacted you, so you have some of my stuff there.
Yeah, thank you. I did see those.
Can you hear me?
Yep, yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, right. Mr. Donor, we did receive your email, absolutely, and we'd be happy to talk about any of the comments that you wanted to.
Yeah, I actually had one question, and then I have some comments. Can one sign up for? I sent an email to the planning email, and I don't think I got a response yet. Like for comprehensive plan amendments and also for rezonings, can you sign up for a geographical area? So like if I live in the Mason district, or if I live in 22044, or even now with some of these apps, you can actually go in and draw a boundary, like with Nextdoor or with Ring, or you can actually draw a little boundary to say I want to be notified of anything in this area.
We on the DPD end of things, we just have our comprehensive plan listserv, Facebook. We also use Twitter. To your point, some of the district offices, and I'm not positive about the Mason district, maybe Michael will be able to say one way or the other, but some of them use Nextdoor, some to greater effect than others, to kind of get at exactly what you're talking about.
But if I just want to sign up for, my question is, if I want to sign up for email notifications for any comprehensive plan or rezoning applications submitted, can I sign up by region, or I just only want to get things in the Mason district?
I can jump in. I'm Leanna O'Donnell. I'm the director of the planning division, and your question has come up more globally, I know, at a department director level, given interest in exactly what you're talking about. You you have a boundary and you would like to know if there's a plan amendment or rezoning or a site plan, submitted. And I think that that question was, I will find out where that is. The answer is not right now, but I know that there was some research going into that with our county GIS office and linking that to some of our other systems. So let me see where that is, and we can certainly follow up. For now, for plan amendments, though, your best bet, as Graham mentioned, would be to sign up for our listserv. We do include in there what district the comprehensive plan amendment is in, I believe. And if we don't, we will start doing that. But that is different than what you're asking. But I wanted you to know that that was being looked into, just
Yeah,
for ease for
yeah,
community members to kind of get the full picture, right, of what's under review in your area.
right. And not to get too much,
Mhm.
because sometimes if you get too much, you
Right,
get overwhelmed.
right. I will find out, and maybe we could follow up over email. And if others on this call are interested too, I'll just see where that is, because that has come up in other meetings that I've been in. Just wanted to let you know.
That's a good
And,
idea.
and these are my comments, just my high level observations. But I've been involved now in like 3 or 4 matters with planning and zoning and comprehensive planning and zoning. I live in Ravenwood Park, so the Justice Park and Justice High School, whole thing is an example. And then the recent for the First Christian Church up on Leesburg Pike, and then previously a development that was put in at the end of Peace Valley Lane, and all of them have involved some degree of problems and challenges with planning and zoning. And I tell people, Supervisor Gross and others have really taught me, and you all by example. I mean, I don't learn this stuff by reading. I learn it by doing
Mhm.
and getting into this stuff. So you all have taught me, because you teach me. When you teach somebody sometimes really well, then you're going to get back from your students, feedback that's going to ask provoking questions, or hold you to things. Um, and one thing that Commissioner Strandley had said that stuck in my mind is that she said they didn't get that much input for the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program. So I look at that as a context. Um, but and I said some of these things already, Graham, in my email comments. But one thing I'm seeing at both the comprehensive planning and also even with the Justice Park, where they, the planning division signed this document, is failure to comprehensively address all relevant policy plans. And like the one for the First Christian Church, it didn't include the public facilities, and yet stormwater was a major thing. I mean, there was nothing in the staff report where they actually called out specific policy plan objectives and policies from the public facilities policy plan. So that's in the same with the park. I mean, the planning people signed a document approving a change without ever referencing the park and rec policy plan, and as a result, it's like shot the whole process in the foot with regard to open space and everything else. My second observation, and this is a question that's been asked uh, by others, and that is, this transition to in the phasing between comprehensive plan amendment and rezoning, and I just came across this in the reading I did. It says in the public facilities policy plan, objective 3, policy B, is to quote, ensure that adequate facility space and services are available, comma, programmed in the CIP, comma, or provided by new development, comma, before, it says before, increased plan intensities through revision of the comprehensive plan. So I read that as a policy, but then I look in practice and I don't see it happening. I mean, we raised that point uh, several times with regard to the First Christian Church, with regard to both stormwater and sidewalks. I mean, there's literally no sidewalk between the church and Patrick Henry Drive and Seven Corners along Leesburg Pike, and there's been no sidewalk there for 20 some odd years. So it's like it's and this relates to site specific, and it relates to following our own policies, practices. The other thing is not going beyond the site comprehensively. I mean, like not including the public facilities policy plan is an example. When you don't do that, when you relate to things like transportation and stormwater. And another example is, not doing stormwater calculations beyond the site, and yet the site involves changing things like, more impervious surface on a road. So, we've got stormwater issues flooding somebody's yard in our neighborhood, like the water goes up 6 feet. It's a hazard to health. It's a public health hazard. It's really serious. And it's taken a lot to get people just to listen and getting people to do it. So I give that. One of my favorites that I'm beginning to observe is what I'm calling comprehensive infrastructure planning. And this is an example, of the need to be able to address infrastructure from a community level. And the gross example of this I see is when you literally have VDOT coming in and milling and paving a street for the first time in 10 years. And then 6 months later, Washington Gas comes in and starts digging up to replace a gas line. And I read the public facilities policy plan, and I see in there, I believe, a strong desire to address this kind of stuff. But like the plan itself, it just ends. It doesn't even include any future discussion in the document about utilities and utility integration. Then as we look at things like 5G and wireless and all that stuff, these are all things that greatly affect. As I go up and look at Leesburg Pike and see the street and say, how's this street going to look in 5 years if this particular church property is developed and they add in a sidewalk? How is all that supposed to come together? And then my last comment is I call it integration of data. And this is like integration of stormwater planning to be able to see what's planned, integration of the sidewalks in the FCDOT, integration of what's in the CIP, integration of what's in the schools and what they're planning. I mean, for the First Christian Church, I had to do a lot of digging just to find the information. I couldn't go to one map, one GIS tool, and pull it all together to see what was planned. And to me, to a degree, it should be obvious when you start looking at these things. I mean, if I had a GIS plan that showed all the FCDOT sidewalk plans right now for 7 corners down to Bailey's, and I saw gaps where there's no plans, and then we need to put VDOT in here too, that right now that should be a no-brainer that says, hey, we need CIP and or Kate Corey / Senator Sassel input to get funding to put the sidewalks in, or to get funding with Dominion to move utilities so that we can, and to me, this needs to be all part of the site-specific and the comprehensive planning process, where, as you said, we need to increase inclusion and community engagement and achieve a better balance of resources for long-range planning. And I'm seeing this not because I know it all, but because I'm seeing it with my own eyes as I read and study and think and observe, go out and walk and then deal with these real world problems that we have just in where we live in the 7 Corners area and beyond. Is that fair? Any questions?
I think much of it, I think we would generally concur with. I think that one of the things that we kind of grapple with, I guess you could say, is with the SSPA and with kind of the doing comprehensive planning, and sometimes in advance of a development application, but without having the details that you would only realistically see with a development application, like stormwater calculations, for example. Part of what we do is try to determine at a policy level, whether something should advance, and without kicking the can for policy questions down the road, but being able to evaluate things once you have that level of analysis. So we're trying with our screening phase in particular to enhance the submission requirements to get more information to determine, at a high level, is this something that's going to be presenting a public facilities issue, as you've kind of pointed out, or is there going to be something like was the case, as Joshua remembers, is there a significant stormwater issue that is going on in the neighborhood that is not necessarily tied just to First Christian, but is something that's a broader thing that really needs to be grappled with. So I think the spirit and most of the details, I think, of what you're saying are dead on, and we would agree with. I know that we've heard a lot of discussion about the need for kind of additional data and additional analysis, during our planning process. SSPA, I'll just say this: SSPA is just one of the means by which we evaluate the comprehensive plan, and kind of deals with just individual sites, right? But part of what we're doing with what we're trying to do with the changes and the revisions that we're making to the process is to be able to do the SSPA process, look at the high priority nominations, but reserve the balance of both staff and the community's time to look at kind of what you're describing, which are more, systematic, issues that need to be grappled with from a environmental standpoint, transportation, looking at multimodalism, looking at public facilities, in a truly comprehensive way, so that we can do the real, what we think of as true long range planning.
Right.
So yeah,
I appreciate you very much.
I think we agree.
Yeah.
We're in pretty much total agreement with you.
Right. Thank you.
I don't know who is next here.
I think we have some hands up. I'm not sure who was next. But I see Joshua Booth.
Yeah, Josh, go ahead.
No, Bernard was first.
Oh, Bernie.
Bernie.
Hey guys, thank you again for this presentation and for scheduling all these meetings. Really appreciate it. I just have a couple questions for clarification. In the past, there's always been not so much a request, but it was helpful to always submit a concept plan. I do see that it is now going to be a requirement of some sort. To what level of detail would that conceptual illustration be? Would it be something like a pre-application level of detail, a more thought out, but not quite there, final development plan? I mean, because it depends on from nominator to nominator on their means. Is it like back of napkin drawing, or like a more engineered level?
It's a good question. We're not going to have like a checklist of required elements of a concept plan. Far from it. We're kind of the same mind, Bernie, I think, as you are, which is that, part of the open, part of the kind of one of the really positive elements of SSPA, and this is going back to the APR days, has been the openness of the process to anybody to be able to submit. And so we want to make sure, and we've tried very carefully to make sure that with the changes that we're making, that remains the case. And so the submission for a concept plan, for example, it's certainly not going to be a requirement that it be like a engineer drawing level, architect stamped, anything close to that. I'm more towards kind of the back of the napkin, something that's going to be able to describe to a reasonable standard what is embodied in the justification narrative. But if somebody submits it, we'll take a look at it, and if it's totally unclear in terms of what they're proposing, we'll ask them to resubmit it. But we're not going to. It's going to be fairly open. I don't think we're going to have very many checklist items, so to speak, in terms of you should provide a landscape plan, should provide a circulation diagram. It's not going to be anything like that. It's going to be.
I would just the intent is I think we've all seen increased community staff and even at the planning commission board level, sort of increased informal expectations to understand what the proposal is. So, if someone doesn't know what 12 to 16 dwelling units per acre means, for example, help us with that by providing a concept. But we're not going to be, as Graham said, we're not going to be calculating open space per the zoning ordinance at that level. It's really to kind of understand what the proposal is on the site in relationship to the adjacent properties.
Okay, so something at least on the level to better convey the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, stick figures and everything.
Let me put it this way: we got with South County, for example, and it's also with North County. We received with most nominations some type of concept plan. It's just that in a couple of instances we didn't, and in those instances we ended up requesting them later on. And so because we were having a hard time understanding, and the community was having a hard time understanding, for example, what's the difference between, the 12 units to the acre that you're proposing and say, 8, it's hard to describe that without some sort of visual illustration. So we ended up requesting them later down the line anyway. So this is really trying to make sure that it's just clear from the get-go. It's like, we're going to be asking for this no matter what. We'll just give you a little bit more time to be able to put it together.
Right. And, I totally agree, and that it's extremely helpful to have these illustratives. It was just a matter of the expectation for that level of detail, and some nominators may not feel comfortable to spend too much money or much time into putting something together until after a nomination has been authorized by the board, and then they'll feel more comfortable. So I was just trying to figure out timing wise and level expectation for that. A couple other
I would take a look at this. Yeah, just to wrap, I would just take a look at what's been submitted previously. We're not asking for anything, beyond what we've seen in the past during the screening phase. We do, work with nominators during the evaluation phase to, button things up if we need to, but not during screening. It's supposed to be very quick.
Great. Just a couple other quick questions for clarification. In terms of the SOJ components, I noticed that there were about 4 items there in the past. What was requested from staff was to at least address at least one of those items. Are you now suggesting to address all 4 points that was listed on your slide there, or to, again, just to at least zoom in on one of those?
I think it's basically as applicable. These are the kinds of things that we'll be using to evaluate. And so if you have, if there's sufficient justification using all of these, great. But if there isn't, one of them doesn't apply, for example, then so be it. But I think they're generally speaking, address an emerging community concern. Let me pull it up real quick to make others look at.
Then one last thing, probably a request or a comment. I really like the idea of creating this idea of a flexible and tailored approach to how a nomination, once authorized, would go through the public review process. I am concerned, based on past experiences and past comments from the community, that if you are submitting one-pagers during the screening phase and then moving forward to PC and board without identifying how that community engagement could look like if a nomination is proposed, that could spell some or create some uncertainty and discomfort in the community. And folks might express that in deep concerns as what happened, I believe, during the Fairfax Forward process. There was a lot of feedback from the community members that they relied so much on the predictability of APR that they were very uncomfortable with not knowing whether this nomination would, if authorized, would come back to them or to a appointed committee or to a standing land group. So not necessarily having staff to put in a lot of time and effort, but just to at least say, hey, we think as staff, if this is authorized, and that's only if you agree, if your preliminary recommendation is to authorize this, staff would think it would be best served in the engagement process X. At least have that up front so that the community can also discuss that as well, is my comment. Or else I feel like there would be a lot of, again, some negative feedback from the community as it moves forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bernie. I think the trick with it, of course, is making sure that it's ultimately the board members' decision. So if we were to do something along those lines at the screening phase, we just have to caveat it 100 times that this is a staff recommendation for how engagement could proceed, rather than this is what to expect at the next stage. So it's a tricky thing. I hear your point, and I think it's a good comment, because we want to make sure that people's expectations for engagement are as clear as they can be. That being said, once something's at the evaluation phase, it will be a public process. It's going to be one of those selected types. Is it going to be an ad hoc task force, in which case community is going to be invited? Land use committee, in which case the community is going to be invited. Targeted community meetings, same deal, and we'd still do all the notifications and
right. And I'm sure after the first couple rounds of this and community in the county gets accustomed to it, it'll be fine. It's just probably for this first cycle. Maybe it's just some more education for something to say, you know, it will be, if authorized, it will be evaluated by these options to be determined at authorization, time of authorization, just to provide that certainty for them, or at least a better idea of it. Okay, those are my comments. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Brady. I appreciate it. All right, and Josh?
Yeah, so I guess I just have a couple question and a comment really. What are maybe I'm not so aware. What are the other plan amendment processes or options that are available?
So SSPA is the one that's kind of cycle based, that has the task force involvement, has the nomination period in which anyone can submit. So when you're dealing with like specific land use changes for, say, the First Christian Church, for example, this is the process for that. In addition to the cycle, the SSPA cycle, the board has the ability at any point to be able to authorize site-specific plan amendments outside of the cycle. So you'll see this, if something is kind of strategic importance, if something really can't wait for the next round of SSPA, given that it's a high priority item for the board, they can and do authorize plan amendments outside of the cycle. And they don't necessarily follow a task force model. That's where we have kind of similarities to where these recommendations are heading, where once something's on the work program and it's been advanced to the evaluation stage, the district member will select the type of engagement that they want to do. Mm-hmm. And so this will help to align kind of those processes, kind of taking some of the positive elements of the out of cycle amendments in terms of adapting community engagement to suit the needs of the amendment. That's something that happens today. It's just outside of the cycle currently. The other types of amendments deal with different aggregations. So you have kind of your area-wide studies. So looking at all of the Bailey's Crossroads or Seven Corners, all of Annandale, for example, when that took place about 10 years ago. Lincolnia, for example, that's kind of a board authorization for an area-wide study. That's kind of the other type, in terms of geography. And then the last one are countywide amendments. So dealing with a specific thing in the policy plan. So to Mark's example, looking at a change, for example, to the public facilities policy plan. That's actually an ongoing effort right now. And so we deal with policy changes to make sure that writ large across the county, we're keeping up in terms of our priorities. And so those changes globally, those are the kinds of things that we, all things being equal, would prefer to kind of orient the long range planning division's time towards. SSPA, as you know, it takes a lot of staff time and it takes a lot of the community's time, and it has to happen that we would deal with it given the comprehensive plan structure. But we think kind of by and large, there's an advantage to looking at broader levels of planning focus along the lines of what Mark was describing, because you're able to deal with things from a systems perspective.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it does make a lot of sense to have larger studies, but yeah, I could definitely see that there's certain circumstances where something much more specific is necessary. But the board doesn't always know what people are thinking.
Right.
So yeah, and so let's see. So then my comment was like about the conceptual site plan. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what Bernie was saying about some of that stuff, and yeah, it does help to visualize stuff if there's a conceptual site plan. But I kind of wish that, or there was some way to cap how much detail would be put in the conceptual site plan, because I don't really like it when people get so hung up on specifics of that specific site. Like, okay, I mean, we didn't get down to like, is there the door going to be here? Is but like, I feel like people can get mired in the details when this is supposed to be a comprehensive plan update and not, I just don't know so much about the rezoning, but I expect you guys would deal with that stuff more during rezoning, and then the actual build, all the permitting, right?
This is like music to all of our ears. Exactly. Yes. 100%, yes. And sometimes what we have to do, and we're doing this with some of our amendments, is we have to dial back when it comes time to actually write the plan text on some of the details that we've been, dealing with, as a part of the process. So yes, I think that it's a perfectly valid and good comment that, what we're dealing with the comprehensive plan should be broad. It should be grounded in policy, and to the degree we can kind of deal with deal with issues of a policy level at the comprehensive planning stage, and have less detailed analysis, as and making sure that we're dealing with those sorts of issues later on, whether it's at the rezoning stage, site plan review, et cetera. Just making sure that we're dealing with things at the right process and at the right point of time when we have the right amount of information. So music to our ears.
It's helpful to hear that comment from you, though, also because I think we share that, and that kind of, we're always kind of walking that balance about reacting to a design before we talk about whether or not more housing somewhere is appropriate, or a new retail, before the big picture. But by its very nature, this process sort of invites that, if it's more site specific, so wanting to help just with understanding what's being proposed. But I appreciate that you raised that as well from your perspective. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I want to be able to speak to my neighbors. Look, I live in Lincolnia, right? But if I'm talking about something elsewhere in Mason District, right, they're still kind of my neighbors. But if I want to be able to speak to them on a more conceptual level rather than on a more plan level rather than just some guy's specific project. I mean, sometimes I feel like if these people they submit the application and they have this very detailed plan of what they want to do, and it's kind of shocking to see such a huge change in your neighborhood especially when it's so detailed. And it's like, oh yeah, we're going to do this tomorrow. We're going to do this the day after it's approved. Well, no, that's not really what's happening, right? I like I said, I'd almost wish that they could just go down to just stick frame, take all the color out of it, take all the little adornments out of your conceptual site plan, and try to make it very general. I mean, because what could happen too is the guy could sell his property to someone else and they could come up with a completely different thing. It could still fit the conceptual, the comprehensive plan, the idea of the comprehensive plan, but now it's some other guy doing it and his design is going to be completely different.
It's that is the tension point. You're dead on, because the community wants details, and we want assurances, and but to your point, things can and often do change in terms of people's intentions and what they want to do with their property. So dead on.
Thanks. That's all I have.
No, great comment. Anybody else have any questions, comments?
If I can ask another quick question, it's a very complex question with no quick answer. But given the post-COVID and all, I do a lot of walking around Seven Corners, and I see what's there. And one of the questions I'm asking myself is, in the post-COVID environment, is there significant potential for changing some of the previous, you might say, even comprehensive plans? And I was looking at like the Urban Institute or other places to see if there was any studies or recommendations out. The ability to be agile when things potentially could have changed significantly. How do we address that in the overall comprehensive planning? And do you all have any resources where you're looking at it? I'm thinking about it a lot, but I don't know the answers.
Yeah, this is where, to your point, having a better orientation towards true long-range planning and being able to incorporate data and look at trends, look at where's the market going, and what does that mean for suburban but urbanizing locations around the country like Fairfax. What does that mean? In terms of SSPA, there's two things in particular that I think can really kind of help with that. One is kind of dialing in on making sure that the justification narratives can explain how are they changing to a change in circumstances. That absolutely can include market changes, post-COVID, induced market changes. The other one is the frequency of the cycle. So There's been going down from a 4-year kind of timeout period to a 2-year timeout period will allow more areas that would otherwise have been ineligible to submit for SSPA this round to kind of get a better sense of like, well, we did all this planning, but then COVID happened 2 years ago. So do we need to make a change in response to the different world that we find ourselves in? So
Right.
To your point, it's through better focus on data and where we anticipate things heading.
And just to add on briefly as an example, we to that point about being agile, the plan currently has the office building repurposing guidance and some retail repurposing guidance, and so that's one of our goals, is to kind of get ahead of those trends so that countywide, kind of a more global perspective on what should we be looking at, and what can we identify in the comp plan at a policy level to help address these rather than reacting to the site specific level nominations. So
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, great question. Anyone else? All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time. I think we're kind of nearing the end of our time here, but if you have any questions or comments, that you think of afterwards, let me just drop my email into the chat. Feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to chat further. And if you are interested, we are going to be going to the Planning Commission's Land Use Process Review Committee to discuss the revisions and the presentation in the white paper next Thursday. So it's a Thursday, I believe it's 7 o'clock. And so if you're interested, feel free to tune into that. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. Bye.